the things that I think a lot of entrepreneurs have in common is they are stubborn, not necessarily
you
in
might say
a bad way.
principled.
Principled, yeah, principled, and they. Today I'm speaking with Ron Price. Ron is an internationally recognized business advisor, executive coach, speaker, and author. Known for his creative and systematic thinking, business versatility, and practical optimism. Ron has worked in 15 countries and served in almost every level of executive management over the last 40 years. Welcome to Beacon for Business, Ron.
Thank you, Brett. It's good to be with you and good to reconnect after many years of going different directions.
Well, full disclosure, Ron used to be my boss several years ago. The company that we were building and we were developing was a different animal. And so there was a lot of infrastructure that had to be put in place. And the management team spent a lot of time with Ron teaching us how to be leaders and how to manage at a higher level. So I'm very thrilled to have Ron today. When Ron left that company, he started his own company. Can you talk a little bit? We talked the other day about some of the things you went through. Part of it was to determine, what the company was going to be and what you were going to do with the next chapter of your life.
Yeah, thank you, Brett. Sure, I'm happy to. It's my tenure at the company that we worked at together was coming to an end. That was in my late 40s. And I came to a point where I thought I was going to have to make a decision. Am I going to work for this company for the rest of my career, where I answer to a board of directors, but I'm not an owner? And therefore, I really have to manage the company according to the values of the owners, which for the most part were aligned with mine, but there were some areas where they weren't the same. Or am I going to do something different? And I decided that I was going to go ahead and start something different. And I had no idea what I was going to do, but I knew that I had an opportunity to build a company that was based on the things that were most important to me. My wife and I went on a retreat in Sun Valley, and we spent a weekend thinking about what might we do together. And we first built a list of 25 different businesses that we thought, hey, we could do any one of these. Any one of these, we could learn and operate these businesses. And at that point, we made a decision which one we were going to go with. And I have to say that at the time that I did it, I let myself be influenced maybe a little bit too much by the earning potential of the business that we chose. It looked to me like it was going to be the most lucrative one. That wasn't the only reason for it. I also liked that business opportunity because I saw it as a wonderful chance to mentor young people and to teach them principles in business. And that there was a tremendous amount of both freedom of time and economic freedom that they could earn as a part of the business. It was another sales organization. And so we started that. And the first 12 months, I thought, I have to prove that this works myself. So I didn't start by building a staff. I did have somebody who helped me with my bookkeeping. But other than that, I said, I'm going to go out and sell myself for the next 12 months and see if I can validate that this is a viable business, that I can prove that we can go out and build a good clientele, a good customer base. And I did that. And after that 12 months, we had developed about 350 customers. So I was satisfied that it was going to not be easy, but that it had the potential to be successful. So then I started hiring other people and bringing them on. I was a couple years into the business, and there were a number of things that, although it was true that it did create great opportunity, I found out that selling for other people was a lot harder than it was for me. I could kind of tough it out. I could take the rejection and the no's and keep going. Wasn't always easy, but I'd always bounce back the next day. And eventually, because of the customer service that we offered, I could build this clientele that would stick with us. But it was very difficult for other people that I hired. I found that for most of the people that I brought on as salespeople, it was tough. Not so for one of my sons. One of my sons had just gotten out of high school and he was getting ready to go into college. And he said, Dad, I want to do it. He would follow me around. He was energized by this opportunity to do this. They've just built a wonderful business way beyond anything that I could have done. But it wasn't the business for me. It worked for them. After a few years, I said, I really don't enjoy this much. So I went back to my list of businesses that I had built plans for. And the next one on the list was a business that was focused on executive coaching. And I decided, it's probably not as lucrative, but I really love helping people. I really love developing leaders. I'm going to give this a try. We launched what we called Price Associates in March of 2004. And we had a great run with that business. In the early days, we spent most of our time helping entrepreneurs that were going through fast growth, very similar kinds of tension points that you and I dealt with in the company that we worked at together, where you're growing real fast and you've got great entrepreneurial energy, but now you need to bring in some management discipline and you have to build some systems and develop better role clarity, leadership team, things like that. And so I did that for quite a while. That business is still alive today, although I'm semi-retired from it. I still am involved advising some of our people, but I don't do any client work anymore. And we've got spin-offs because of the other things we've done. So probably the biggest spin-off from it is called The Complete Leader. It's our leadership development program, but it's a whole ecosystem. It's a website that you can buy a subscription to. And then we have these very complex and deep leadership development programs that companies use where they bring us in for over a year to work with their people. And then we have another branch that focuses on innovation and how we help companies to create new value for their customers. And then a third one that focuses on strategic planning, how we help companies prepare for, then create, and then execute on their strategic plans.
Let's talk about strategic planning a little bit. I remember back in the days when we worked together, that was a very painful process at the start. None of us, well, at least from my perspective, I lived in a tactical world. And some of the things I did, in hindsight, had some strategy, had strategy built into it. But I remember we spent a lot of time. We went on off-site management retreats up into the mountains above Boise, and it was probably about like pulling teeth for you to try and get the team to stay on strategy versus tactics. And I think it's almost impossible to not have that leak into the conversation. But
yeah, as a matter of fact, one of my mentors around strategy once advised me, Ron, he said, don't ever have an operations meeting and a strategy meeting at the same time. Keep them separate, because the moment you bring operations into it and tactics into it, that's something that's visible to people. It's easy for them to understand, and they'll always migrate or they'll work in that direction. Strategy is often much more difficult because it's more visionary, it's long-term, it's more ambiguous, harder to understand, and it's much more intuitive usually in the early stages of it. So you have to really work at it. And I often felt that working on strategy was like starting to walk through a muddy field. You can take the first few steps, but you start collecting a lot of mud on your boots and you get about midway through the field and you're worn out. You don't know if you can get to the other side. But at that point, you don't have any choice because it's just as hard to go back as it is to go forward.
Well, I would say that if you allow the tactical issues to leak into that conversation, very specific, real, current time problems start to be hashed out during the strategy session, and you lose it right then.
Yeah. I also think, Brett, that what I've learned over the years is that every organization has its current capacity for developing strategy. And you have to, instead of trying to do it perfectly, we have a book called Optimizing Strategy for Results, where we really went into every little detail. It's a textbook but for most companies, it doesn't work that way. You have to identify what they're capable of right now and how do you help them take the next few steps forward. So I remember one organization, it was a nonprofit, and they asked me if I'd do strategic planning with their board of directors. And I said, sure, I'd be happy to do it. And then they called me up to schedule. They said, oh, by the way, we only have one day set aside for developing strategy. Well, Well, I think strategy is an ongoing process. You never finish it. You're always talking about it. But I said, okay, it'll be interesting to see if I can help them take the next step in one day. Then they called me back a few weeks later and said, well, actually, we want to do something fun and recreational in the afternoon. So we'd like you to develop our strategy in the morning so we can have fun in the afternoon.
So it's gone from a full day to a half a day.
Yeah, that's it. And then when I got there, they said, well, truth of the matter is we only have 90 minutes. Can you help us get our strategy in 90 minutes? So I'm game to try something new. So I thought, okay, we're not going to work on vision or mission or values in 90 minutes. We can't do it. So what could we do in 90 minutes? So I broke them up into, I can't remember if it was 2 or 4 teams with flip chart paper. And I said, okay, you guys work on what you think our internal strengths and weaknesses are. What do we do well already? And what are we not so good at? And you guys over here work on what you think our external opportunities and threats are. What could we do and what could threaten our success? And then the last 30 minutes, we said, you can't do everything, but you can do something. So what are the 3 strengths that you want to leverage? What are the 3 weaknesses you want to work on? And doggone it, in 90 minutes, they had what they thought was a strategic plan. Now, for me, that was not strategy, but for them, it was their next step. It helped them the next year to know what they should focus on. So I've learned that you really have to adapt to the organization.
And where they were as an organization in their development, was that really kind of where they needed to be? They needed to take that first small step?
Well, what I discovered, which was a little bit out of order, but what I discovered was they really didn't want to rehash their vision or their mission or their values. They had done that in the past. They didn't want to do that. They wanted something that was going to be over the next 1, 2, or 3 years. What are the most important things for us to focus on? So in contrast to that, one of my more recent projects was a company. Again, I was asked to come in and lead a company. Most of the time I would say no, but this was a company that I had a lot of passion for. And so I agreed to lead them as their CEO for 3 years. And we had to go back and work on strategy. And they had a mission and a vision and values, but nobody really resonated with them. They were kind of old. They'd been created by other people. I didn't see any energy around them. So I said, let's go back and revisit these. And with that company, we spent a whole year with 25 members of their leadership team talking about the origins of the company. Why was it originally started? Why does it exist today? What might it mean in the future? And we developed a new purpose statement for the company. And interestingly, this is when you get into the nuances with a company that has more capacity. I distinguish between what the company's purpose and their mission is. Their purpose is why they exist, and it should be relevant for the next 100 years, theoretically. Their mission is how they apply that to the current world they're operating in. And so from that, we developed a 10-year vision. And then we looked at their values, their core values, and they had 7 of them, and they were all good, but nobody could repeat them to me. And I said, if you have to look at a piece of paper to remember them, then we've got to simplify this. So we boiled them down to 3 very simple, very concise, but in their minds, very powerful value statements. Those became our new core values. And then based on that, then we went into that next exercise I was telling you about that I refer to as developing your strategic intelligence. What are we good at? What are we not so good at? What's happening in the world around us? How might it affect us in the future? And from that discussion, again, over several months, we developed 200 different ideas of what we thought we might be able to do as a company. I think in that particular year, we ended up with 7 strategic themes that everything we did that next year was going to be built on those 7 themes. And it was interesting, Brett. I found that they had a lot more capacity for that more intuitive work. But when we got into the execution of it, the planning and execution, this was where their weakness was. We had, out of those 7 strategic themes, we had 25 goals for the year, and they only accomplished about 5 of them. And so I don't ever play the blame game, and I don't ever say it's because there's something for us to learn there. What I learned was we did not have very good project management skills. We're not very good at building and then executing the plan. So the next year we cut our goals way down and we made our number one strategic priority the next year to master project management throughout the entire company. And the next year we nailed it. We had over half of our employees had gone through a project management course and were using project management software to get things done. And suddenly we had dramatically elevated our ability to execute because we recognized and gave our attention to developing a new skill. So,
is it correct to say that the project management kind of gave some accountability that you've got these mileposts and achievements that you post within the software, and so people can see where they're at. So what you measure is what you do.
yeah, but I would take it one step previous to that. We identified somebody who had natural talent and passion for project management, and we made them our project management champion, and it was their job to support everybody throughout the company. And I understand project management, but I've never been great at it because I'm more of a big picture thinker. So she worked with me to make sure that I had a well-developed, detailed plan for what my responsibilities were. And then we met every 2 weeks and she would walk me through that plan and say, well, where are we at here? Where are we at there? I could be kind of proud as the CEO and say I'm above that, but no, I needed her help. I needed to be humble and to let her teach me and help me with that. And just the fact that she was carrying it made it so that I didn't have to carry it. And I became much more productive as a result. The other big thing that project management taught us that year, Brett, was where we had conflicting priorities amongst the different silos in the business. Because when you've got good project management throughout the company, and then you see where things aren't quite moving the way they should, quite often the reason is because you've got people trying to do too many different things or working cross purpose with each other. And there are tensions between departments because they don't have the same agendas. So that really helped us to address that and to deal with that. And, I don't know that that's something that you ever get past. I was with that company for 3 years and we were still struggling with that when I finished my tenure there, but we had improved a lot. At least it was visible. We knew what was going on and we had the tools to negotiate those things when they came up.
With strategic planning, that's kind of a never ending process, correct?
Yeah. And I think, again, as we said, you've got to distinguish between the tactical part of it, which I think is more in the category of management, and the visionary part of it, or the long-term part of it, which is more in the category of leadership. And so you have to be able to function in that area. One of the things that we did when we wrote the book, Optimizing Strategy for Results, was we looked at how you might be able to identify what part of the strategy process people have the greatest chance of excelling in. Because we know that not all people are equal. And if you think of it like putting together a baseball team, you're not going to put equal talent at every position. So when we wrote the books, Optimizing Strategy for Results, we identified 7 distinct stages of strategy. 3 of them fit into how you prepare for strategy, how you get ready. And 2 of them had to do with how you create your strategy. Now, what commitments and decisions do you make? And then 3 of them had to do with how do you execute that strategy and keep learning and adapting as you go. Because in today's world, your strategy is always going to have some flexibility in it. And so we identified what kinds of people would excel in each of those 7 stages. And what was interesting was that we found that the person who's really good at the strategic foundations, which are about vision and mission and purpose and values, those people are not very good when it comes to what we call strategic intelligence, where you evaluate the current circumstances, because their brains are wired differently. Their interests are different. Their personalities are different. So we developed a way to identify what people's strengths were so that you could organize your larger strategy team around where the strengths were. And don't ask somebody to be a third baseman when really they're a right fielder.
When somebody gets completely immersed in their piece of the pie and their part of the company, they can get a little single focused.
Yeah, it's very important. you both help people understand where they can excel, but then you have to make sure that you're also helping them understand how they integrate into the whole. And so that they care about what the other people are doing, even though it might not be their sweet zone, they still care about it because it's critical to the overall company success. It's a little bit kind of like life, isn't it?
Yeah, just a little bit. So your suggestion, and correct me if I'm wrong, would be it's never too early to start the strategy, the putting your strategy together along with your mission and your purpose and all that. Um, and you're never finished.
Yeah, that's correct. Both of those are true. And what you emphasize and how you work on it is going to ebb and flow over time because you're always going to have areas that you're really good at and that come easy for you. For a lot of entrepreneurs, the idea of why we're in business comes pretty easy for them. But then how do you execute it? And a lot of times with entrepreneurs, one of the big pain points in their experiences, the business gets big enough that they can't control everything that's going on. So now as they're going to start to delegate, do they really delegate or do they just dump on people? Do they really give people authority with the responsibility or do they give them responsibility but hold on to the authority? There are a lot of tensions like that entrepreneurs have to deal with when they go through those early growth spurts. But then it continues to change as the company grows and goes through different phases. You constantly have to go back and evaluate what are we doing well and what aren't we doing well and how do we get better?
I've been with a few companies, and I think the company you and I worked with was a little bit this way, where the owners had never worked in a company the size of what they had just built, and so they had never seen anything that needed that kind of infrastructure, and it was hard for them to understand why we needed that infrastructure for everything. And then the other thing is to let up to walk away from some of the control.
In our company that we were in together, Brett, one of the things that I thought was fascinating, which was very germane to your work, was that we decided to open a business in different countries and made the decision that instead of it just being a subsidiary or an office of ours, that every country would be an independent business owned by us. So every country had to operate in a different currency. It had to have its own set of books. I remember many a time when you and I'd be talking and I'd say, Brett, when are you going to have the integrated financial statements done? Because you had to take these financial statements and move them all into U.S. currency, get everything to work right. And it was a monster of a job to try to create good financial reports.
Well, in those days, we didn't have the tools put in place. We got them there. I remember that conversation, and I remember walking away thinking, what else do I got to do here? But no, I understood completely that I was being optimistic, and I would make promises that I couldn't, that didn't pan out in the time frame. And I've actually had those conversations with other people since then. Is don't make promises you know you can't keep. Under promise and overperform.
Yeah, we all have that challenge, but it's not a criticism of you at all. It was due to the complexity of our business.
We weren't a huge company. We were growing fast. I think you were 26 million in sales the year before I started. And then we more than tripled that by the time you and I both left. But we used Deloitte and Touche as our CPA firm, and it was not a small thing to go through an annual audit and for the tax returns, because we had eight companies and I think 7 or 8 countries. And it took it, here's a guy that spent his life, his professional life doing cost accounting, and all of a sudden we didn't make anything. So cost accounting wasn't necessarily the top priority, but heavy duty financial accounting was.
And we learned quickly, I think it was 1997, we learned that you've got to pay attention to international currency dynamics also. I think there was a big crash of the Thai currency in 1997 that, if I remember correctly, it cost all of our profit in Asia that year. We lost the whole year's profit because of 1 week of a currency crash.
And Asia was our fast growing market.
Yeah. So we got smart about bringing an international bank in to help us with international currency management right from that point on.
And we had to make decisions like, hedging. How do you smooth out the risk of international currency if the U.S. dollar gets too strong or tanks, or the Taiwanese dollar, the same thing. And so we were able to. I couldn't quote you the exact strategy we used today, but we used a very and the owners were very conservative. They didn't want to go out and they want to feel like they were playing the stock market. So we did some things that kind of eased the risk, but it didn't take it all away.
One of the things I really appreciated about our owners was that they never wanted us to be in a place where we were having to make decisions because of financial pressure. We were always debt free. We always had a good bank account, and that made it possible for us to make smart decisions, and not most stupid decisions are because you're under financial pressure. And I really appreciate about them. That was a very important part of the culture of our organization financially.
It was. And from my uh, experience, when you get that kind of pressure put on you, whether it's financial or regulatory or anything, you start making decisions based on emotion. And emotional decisions, not always, but I would say most of the time, lead to bad business decisions, or business decisions that take you away from your purpose and your goals.
It's funny because we know that, and yet it still happens. One of our adages that we teach leaders is lead with logic, follow with emotion. The moment you see yourself leading with emotion, recognize you're about to make a mistake.
In the post-COVID world, there's a lot of remote work where people will work from home or they won't be in the office. And there's one of the guys that you and I both worked with, and I became really good friends with him. He went on to be CEO and president of multiple companies and international companies. And he and I worked on in 2024, I guess it was 2020. Yeah, 2024. He called me up during the holidays and said, "What are you doing?" So he had retired, and then one of the people he had worked with decided to start another company, direct sales company. And so I became his fractional CFO. And talk about, we had both gone through the infrastructure issues at the company we'd worked with, and we had a big, nice warehouse and distribution center, and we had physical locations, either owned or rented in multiple countries, and offices. That wasn't the way that went. They have companies called 3PLs that they're basically just warehouses and distribution centers for hire. And then we would source the product and have it sent to the 3PL, and they would warehouse it for us and package it and ship it out for us. And there was no office. Everyone who worked there, from the marketing people to the accounting people to the management people, the product development people, work from home. And that creates its own challenges. And that obviously a lot of companies have been able to overcome, but you're not sitting in an office with a group of people, with your management team. I think back in the days when we would fill up the boardroom with the management team, and we'd all sit there and see the same things and hear the same things every day or every meeting.
This is, I think, looking at a company and asking yourself the question about remote versus in person is part of identifying your strengths and your weaknesses or your limitations. And today we have more options than ever before. And that's a wonderful thing because there are a lot of ways to be successful. But it's also a little bit dangerous because it's easier to make the wrong decision when you have lots of options. When you have fewer options, it's easier to narrow down and say, this is what we need to do. And with remote versus in person, right now, you've got to have a good way of evaluating what's going to bring us the greatest success. I always think it should begin with the customer. What's in the customer's best interest, how we function. So if you've got people that are spread around the world a physical location is either going to be very expensive because you have to put it several different places, or it's going to only serve a very, very small sliver of your customer base. So the first question is, what's in the best interest of your customers? The second question, I think, is what's in the best interest of your top, most desirable employees? The employees that you want to hold on to, the employees that you know can either be your superstars or can be very consistent over time. What's the best environment for them to work in? And sometimes that ends up being hybrid. Sometimes it ends up being a mixture. It's a little bit difficult when it's a mixture because employees often feel that they're being unfairly treated when some are allowed to work remote, others are expected to be in office. But those are things you have to do. Some leaders say, I don't want to manage it. I just want everybody in, or I just want everybody remote because that's what their preference is. But my conviction was always that the leader's preference was always what came last. A lot of times as leaders, we just want to minimize conflict. And so we tend to get manipulated by
or we get
whoever.
worn down.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, leadership takes clarity. It takes a lot of wisdom, but then it also takes courage.
Yes.
And once you know the way to go, you have to have the courage to stick with it. And that means you've got to have some resilience. You've got to have some strength because everything's not always going to go the way you think it should. And sometimes the environment changes and you have to decide, is that enough of an environmental change that we have to change our direction? Or do we still hold on to our direction because we know in the long run things are going to swing back or that we'll still be in an advantageous position? And of course, obviously, I didn't mention it, but you have to understand a little bit about how your competitors are handling those questions as well, because how they're handling it can either help or hurt you.
So is that a marketing function? Understanding your competitors?
It is, and it is a marketing function, but ultimately it's a marketing function that needs to come into the conversation about what your overall company strategy is. I think customer experience also is. One of the amazing things to me, right, in all the years that I help companies with strategy is when I would meet with them and I'd ask to see their financial statements and I asked to see what kind of an operating plan they have or their org chart. And then I'd ask them, can you show me your customer experience data? And it surprised me how seldom they had good customer experience data that they brought into the strategy process. They were assuming that they understood their customers. And I think it's almost a guarantee that when you're assuming that you understand your customers, you're missing some of your greatest opportunities.
During a strategy session or a management meeting, and you're talking about challenges and what's going right and what's going wrong, and listening to the right people within the organization. And if you've got a room full of supervisors and managers, how in tune are they with the people that are on the floor or on the phones or, actually doing the work and seeing the stresses and the triumphs that they see every day? And how do you listen to more than just the top echelon of the company and find out exactly what, the people who are doing the work have to say?
Yeah. And unfortunately, sometimes people at the top, because they do know a lot, they know a lot about the business, but that makes them think that they know everything. And they don't. There are often hidden opportunities or hidden dangers that need to be uncovered. This really plays to the beginning of our model for innovation. We always begin innovation with identifying problems to be solved. And then once we've identified these problems to be solved, which is a very creative process, and we're trying to identify as many as possible, the next question is now define these problems. And too often as leaders, and I can be just as guilty of this as the next person, we think we understand the problem and we already think we know the solution to the problem, and we've not gone through this process. And so we end up throwing a lot of mud against the wall, hoping some of it will stick.
What's the old saying that defining the problem is what percentage, like 70% of the solution?
In medicine, we would always say that diagnosis is 90% of the cure. One of the things in our consulting business that I would really work hard at when I was meeting with a new potential client, is that first meeting, my goal was to listen 90% of the time and only talk 10% of the time. And my goal was to never, ever, ever try to sell anything, because until I really understood their business a lot better than I did when I walked in, any advice I had was going to be suspect. And I usually would leave that interview asking, what other kind of diagnostics, what other kind of data, what other kind of interviews with people, what else could I learn about this business that would either help me confirm what I think is going on or uncover something completely new that I hadn't even thought of. The one thing I'm guaranteed, I know for sure, that when it comes to great management, first impressions are never right. You always need to learn more.
As I mentioned earlier, when we were working together, there was a lot of management training, and um, I've got another son that gave me some material to talk about. It was something he hadn't done before, and he's done quite well. Um, they pushed him to be in management and supervisory level within 3 or 4 months after starting, based on his comments. That's the only thing I have to go on with this company, is they have pushed people so fast that their store managers probably aren't quite ready for prime time, probably aren't ready to be store managers. Therefore, and they're not seasoned enough to be able to train the people who are working for them. And so it just emphasizes the need to have a training program. When we worked together, we had a great HR department, and I think about where I would have been if I hadn't learned some of the things that, they would put on training sessions, after hours training sessions. And one of the most valuable ones that I remember going through is it was for all the supervisors and management team on how to hire. The whole thing of training and getting people to be competent in the position they're in. And then when you bring somebody else into a management team, giving them the right tools, giving them all the tools they need to succeed.
Yeah, I think it is really important. And once again, I like to sort of start from the customer and go back. So what do our people need to know to serve our customers well? But then in a way, the training department, their customer is the employee. So what does the employee need to learn? How well have we defined that? And how effectively have we developed a learning process? Of course, in today's world, learning never ends. Right now, I hope everybody's learning as much as they can about AI as fast as they can, because if they're not, they're in trouble. It's touching every business. But learning is very specific to what the challenges are of the person in the job, but it's also very specific to their learning style and their learning tempo. Some people they gobble things up and they want to learn, 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 learn. You can give them a lot of content. Other people, wait a minute, don't give me all that. Give me a chance to absorb it. Give me a chance to integrate some of it. And then we have to understand the difference between learning and mastering. So it's one thing to know how to it's one thing, using the example, one thing to know how to hire, another thing to have mastered it so that it flows naturally from you because you've practiced it and you get better and you get better, you get better. And so we focused a lot on developing leaders, which in many ways is the most difficult kind of learning, because how somebody leads is a great expression of who they are as a person. It's not just about what skills you teach them, but it's also who they are as a person. And what we focused on in our leadership development work was you first have to be able to customize it to that individual. You have to understand who they are, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and how you can build on those strengths and neutralize the weaknesses that need to be neutralized. And then you've got to give them a bridge from learning to doing. You've got to have a way that we know that if somebody goes to a workshop right now, that in 6 weeks they've forgotten 85% of what they learned in that workshop. So how do we build a follow-up program? How do we build an application process so that they're practicing what they learned and eventually mastering it? Oftentimes, a person's got to be willing to go deeper into their own belief system, because a lot of times what they think about leadership, they learn from their parents or they learn from some other early childhood experience. And they think, well, I just need to whip them into shape. And these Gen Z people, none of them want to work. They're all lazy. Well, those are all assumptions that come from somebody's past that in order to be effective, some of those need to be challenged and rethought. Well, how am I going to respond differently? And then the fourth thing that we saw was that when you can find ways to measure the application of learning, that you can measure that they actually learned how to, and they're now doing this, it greatly accelerates the whole process. So,
I don't know if we have a lot we can say about AI, but have you had much experience with AI? Or you see the future there?
yeah, well, I don't know that I see the future, but yes, we use it in the business ourselves, and we've found things where it's very helpful for us. One of the things we're getting ready to integrate is we have a website called thecompleteleader.org, and it has over 1,000 leadership resources in it. And we have a way that you can search for what you're interested in, but we're getting ready to launch our AI assistant inside that website. So somebody can say, well, I want to work on self-management. Resources are on the website that are going to help me develop better self-management skills. And it will list for you where to go and what's there. Or you might say, I don't have time for that. Just give me a summary of what I can do to improve my self-management. And it'll give you a quick summary for how you can improve. So that's one use that I think is really helpful. What we emphasize is AI is not a coach. And so we have a lot of coaches that help develop self-management skills. I'm just picking one of the skills. And they have the ability to help you develop it faster, in a more relevant and quicker way than you're ever going to get from AI because they're a human being. And one of the comments that I made with somebody recently about AI is great for a lot of things, but AI cannot be authentic. Only human beings can be authentic, and only human beings are capable of empathy. AI can fake it, but it doesn't really have it. And of course, AI is not always accurate. It's not always there are different machines, there are different levels of development and learning. And so you just can't make overarching statements that apply to all of AI. But having said that, if you look out there 5 years, a lot of us, instead of supervising people, are going to be supervising AI agents. And some of us, instead of being supervised by a person, we're going to be supervised by an AI agent. I know that's a bit controversial, but that's where it's going to go. And so we all have to learn what parts of it work well, what parts of it don't, how it can help us, where we have to stay away from it. And that's an experimental process. And I don't think people have to be scared that they have to learn it next week. But I think people should be very concerned if they don't have a learning pathway for how they're going to keep developing their skills around AI.
I had an interesting conversation. I know a gentleman who's a radiologist here locally, and we were talking, and I asked him about AI and how it is affecting or will affect his profession. But what he told me is that the hospital is requiring him to use an AI app when he's reviewing X-rays and images. And he said it's frustrating right now because they're in kind of the infancy stage of teaching the AI what to look at. And they said right now he goes in and makes a diagnosis, and then he fixes what AI has done. And he said what he sees as the future in radiology is it'll be the other way around. AI will make the diagnosis, and then you'll have a human that double checks it.
I think eventually that's going to happen in most areas. It's part of the evolution of it. A lot of people are comparing the emergence of AI to the emergence of the internet around 2000. I think our capacity to learn and to improve is much faster, much stronger today than it was back then. But we're still in a learning process with it. And this, again, I come back to the innovation model that we used. When you develop a product, and AI is a product, now you need to verify it. You need to use it with some of your customers, and they need to tell you that it's doing what they want it to do, or where it's got a weakness, where it's not. And this is double checking it, or it's having other people help you. And then when you get that to that point where you can say that you have validated it with your customers, with the end users, now you can deploy it. And now it's very important that you have a business case for how you deploy it that includes your marketing plan and your strategy and your financial performance. And once you've proven that, and that's successful, Now you can think about, now how do we scale it? So again, these are all unique stages of innovation that each require their own set of skills and priorities and tools. And when we skip one of them, we put ourselves at risk. Because when we try to scale something that didn't go through the verify stage, which by the way, entrepreneurs do all the time, they end up finding out they kind of got it right, but they never hit the home run that they should have hit.
One of the things that I think a lot of entrepreneurs have in common is they are stubborn, not necessarily
you might say
in a bad way.
principled.
Principled, yeah, principled, and they don't usually take no for an answer, and it takes them a while to allow somebody else's voice in, because they got where they're at on their own usually, or a lot of times. And so it takes them a while. It takes a while to build that trust to get them to listen to somebody else.
Yeah, and Brett, those are always judgment calls. Who's to say that them not taking a no for an answer, it may be right in that particular instance, but in the next context, it could be wrong. So we don't know. Those are judgment calls that have to be made, that have consequences.
The gentleman that you and I work for, we were selling health food, and sometime before I got there, there was a product that somebody had crossed the line on making claims on the product, and it hadn't been gone through the FDA gauntlet. And so it didn't have, and so I don't know if it was the FDA or somebody showed up and put yellow tape around the warehouse.
That was my third day on the job.
I started
on Monday, and that was Wednesday when that happened.
So you know more about that story than I do, but what I heard was he probably said, "Darn it," and then just opened up a different warehouse somewhere else and had new product shipped to that, because FDA thought it sounds like FDA thought that they had to shut down, and he wouldn't he wouldn't take that as an answer. So he opened up another warehouse and had product shipped to it and continued shipping. So probably interrupted shipping for a few days, and then he went on about the business and learned a very hard lesson.
And I never wanted to repeat that again. I wanted that to be the only time we ever experienced that.
Well, thanks, Ron, for your time today. Yeah, it's been a very valuable conversation for me and hopefully our viewers. And is there any way for people to reach out and find your books or to contact you?
Yeah, well, first of all, Brett, it's been fun. I've enjoyed it. And for an old retired guy, it's fun to be able to get back and talk about things in the past. If people want, best way to touch me now is through our website or through our books. If you go to Amazon and look at Ron Price, there are a lot of Ron Prices, but Growing Influence is one of our more popular books, The Complete Leader. You find those, and then that'll show you the other books that I have. One of the things I'm the most grateful for in my career is somebody who pushed me to start writing. It's actually a guy named Charlie Jones, and the first serious books that I wrote, co-authored, was something called Beyond the Green. And then that eventually led to, I wanted to capture what I felt I'd learned during my first 30 years in business to give it to my kids. So I originally wrote this book for my kids. It eventually became pretty popular beyond that. It's called Treasure Inside, 23 Surprising Principles that Activate Greatness in Your Life. And it really talks about how you grow yourself as an individual. From there, eventually, we wrote The Complete Leader, everything that you need to become a high-performing leader. It's really a coach's guide for 25 different leadership skills, but anybody can use it to develop their leadership skills, to be a better thinker as a leader, a better decision maker, to be better at getting things done, or to be better at working with people. And then that eventually led us to The Innovator's Advantage, where we captured the whole process and the importance of how you match people with the process in creating value through innovating products or services, or innovating your position in the marketplace, or creating a whole new marketplace. And then Stacy Ennis and I wrote a novella, a short novel that's based in Boise, which is probably one of my favorites because it's about a young woman who's in middle management who runs into an older gentleman at a coffee shop in downtown Boise. And what evolves is that she's being discriminated against because she's a mother with a young child. She's being held back from promotions. And so instead of being a victim, they talk about how she can overcome this, how she can address it, and how she can demonstrate power. That book has 9 different leadership principles in it that I've been privileged to teach around the world. And I'm just as passionate about those principles today as I was when we published it in 2018. And then Optimizing Strategy for Results is our next book, focused on the whole process of preparing for creating and executing the strategy. And a new book that's just come out the end of January. And probably the website that would be most interesting for most people is thecompleteleader.org. But you can also go to price-associates.com or theinnovatorsadvantage.com or strategyforresults.com. We got a lot of websites. They're all a little bit focused on things that people may have a particular interest in. But I think you go to thecompleteleader.org and eventually that can get you wherever you want to go, or go to Amazon. I really, really appreciate Amazon, even though when you're an author working with Amazon, you never make any money at all from them. And you never know who it is that bought your stuff because you don't get any contact information. But having said that, you're available to everybody around the world. And because of that, a lot of our books have been translated into multiple languages. And
It's almost an advertising vehicle.
it is. Yeah. Yeah. And it's a great place to send people because it's convenient to everybody.
Well, thank you very much. I can't express how much I appreciate this. You're one of the people that I didn't think would be interested in this, but I was thrilled that you're generous enough to spend some time with me.
Sure. Great. Thanks a lot, Brett. I've enjoyed it.
If you've enjoyed this podcast and would like to reach out to me and maybe come up with some ideas for future podcasts, please reach out to me for spencerbusinessadvisory.1.